Good afternoon. We'll try and wake this up a little bit.
When we were getting this thing, do you remember? The guy that was downstairs when we were getting this thing.
Slides going.
Back to 56 past, I wasn't prepared to translate that.
It's over there.
This host.
There we go. All right. Connect the dots. Here we go.
Okay,
Well, what you'll see here is, I guess I'm in Puerto Rico, and I can just start this off by briefly commenting, because some people are curious about some of the press lately. I just point out it's not our words.
Something?
Start there on that slide, please. I like it very much. I think it's very representative of how you need to view the world, to be extremely competent in it. So just want to leave this in here because we are in the United States, and this is in no way an EOS sort of promotion, but now I want to take you back in time. This is 1994, the Today Show, talking about what is the internet. I mean, I think all of you know what the internet is at this point, but there was a point when you did not.
Back to 56 past, I wasn't prepared to translate that. As I was doing that little tease.
Oh, that's
that little
right.
mark with the A and then the ring around it.
At?
See, that's what I said. Katie said she thought it was about.
Yeah. Oh.
But I'd never heard it.
Around.
I'd never heard it
Okay.
said. I'd always seen the
Okay.
mark, but never heard it said. And then it sounded stupid when I said it. Violence at NBC.
Yeah, I heard you around or about. Go watch your video.
See, there it is. Violence at NBC. GE.com. I mean,
Well, Allison should know.
what
do you
is
think that
internet
Allison?
anyway?
And by 1995, Newsweek was writing that the internet was going to fail, that it was a fad, lots of criminals. By the year 2000, when the internet bubble had burst, there was essentially no venture capitalist in the world that would invest in early stage tech. The world had been completely convinced that this was something that maybe was an academic product and it had some utility there, but there would never be any business. eBay and many of the top companies that had gone public back in that day that were profitable, in the case of eBay, profitable, were trading below cash on their balance sheets. How quickly we forget. And I think that's relevant because the blockchain is a new technology that most people don't understand very well. So what have you heard about Bitcoin in this case? Oh, is it secure? I hear about hackings and all this sort of stuff. It's the most secure system the world has ever seen. Hundreds of times more infrastructure in terms of its encryption than Google has in all of its global infrastructure. But when something happens there, it's not at the protocol level. That would be like saying that because someone's email account got hacked, that email as a protocol doesn't work. These are things happening at the application level. It's incredibly secure. Lots of times, early adopters of new systems are the fringe users. Where do you think Betamax and VHS and all these things, these stories ended? Obviously, as industries mature, more and more of that mainstream adoption occurs, and it looks a lot less like it did before. Prices going up and down. If you followed the sector over the years that it's been going, it's consistently up and to the right. And of course, you're going to be seeing ups and downs because the price is the primary barometer of sentiment. It's not always directly tracking, to the fundamental growth, but all the fundamental usage and the building of the bridges, the roads, and the tunnels, the infrastructure, that's been consistent and all the way up to the right. So what is it? How many of you confidently think you know what Bitcoin is? Well, it's digital value. It's not a government-issued currency, it's a token. It's got fixed supply, and it's programmable. You can write rules into it, like a contract on top of it, so that it can perform functions automatically. It's part of a decentralized system, which we'll get into in a little bit, and it's an incorruptible public ledger. You can't counterfeit a Bitcoin, and so it's a public source of truth. So for the first time in human history, you can transmit value to someone else in the world with complete transparency, with no middleman. It's instant or near instant with negligible fees. That's changed now because of scalability, but this is the general idea of blockchain. So what are the macro sort of trends that are driving this? The most important of which is this concept that can be better read in a book called The Starfish and the Spider. And it's that the world is moving from centralized systems to distributed and decentralized systems. Do you know what happens when you cut the leg off a spider? It walks with a limp. But if you do the same thing to a starfish, it'll grow back. If you cut off that leg with part of the center there, it'll turn into a new starfish. If you cut it 5 ways through the center, it'll become 5 starfish. And this is one of those great books that's talking about decentralization, but not just in a technological sense, but even in this case in nature. But this isn't the only major driver that's affecting this. One of the other big ones is open source software. The world is moving away from this idea of building proprietary software to making open source software. And this isn't a new trend. It's been around for a long time. It's just been going very slowly, even though most of us know that this is a superior model. So why is it going so slowly? Are we wrong? The problem with the open source movement historically is that it's been entirely voluntary, meaning to work on open source projects, you have to donate your time. You don't get paid. So you might do that for, because it's cool. You might have a philanthropic reason. You want something you want to, whatever your motivation is. But when there's a problem, who fixes it? What the blockchain has enabled, the tokenization of the open source movement has enabled, is the ability to add an incentive to the open source, sort of development. Imagine if you could have bought shares in the internet itself. So what these tokens are doing is adding an incentive model to the development of these open source protocols. So that, like, if you could own a piece of TCP and IP and HTTP, etc. And so what happens now is, if you're an engineer, you can make more money working on open source systems than you would working at Google or Facebook. This is when it starts to change, and it changes quickly. That's a major, major trend that's happening. The other is this idea of hardware to share things. It's happening with assets as well, where you're not just trying to have them for yourself. Like with Uber, you're going to share that vehicle. And so these trends are all kind of coming together along with a number of others. But those are the 3 principal ones right now. And so Uber, the largest taxi company in the world, but has no cars. Facebook, the largest media company in the world, but creates no content. Alibaba, etc. Bitcoin is the fastest growing bank in the world with no employees or branches. It's worth noting, some of the other things that change as you have this technology, blockchain in particular. So the world currently runs on this idea of having a centralized system, and all these brands are examples of that, or companies are examples of that. And it's got 3 general constituents. It's got a customer, an employee, and a shareholder. The problem is there's a misalignment of interests amongst them. The customer just wants the best product and service, hopefully at a good price. They'd probably take it for free if they could. The employee wants to, do something they feel good about, be sufficiently remunerated to live a happy and quality life. Sometimes they take it all too, and the shareholder always just wants as much profit. And understandably so, that's how the system has been designed. That's the design of the game. But when you do this using open source systems, you start to build what are called DApps, or decentralized autonomous communities. And something magical happens when you add transparency, auditability, trustworthiness, inclusiveness, and you do it in an open source architecture with a tokenization model. What happens is the customer, the employee, and the shareholder become one, in a way. What happens is, imagine if you could only buy Apple products with Apple stock. And if Apple stock, then now you're, as a customer, you're also starting to look a little bit like a shareholder, because you might not always be buying it down to the penny, and so all of a sudden, you're getting interested in this, product that you're a fan of. You might start buying more of it, and you're realizing that anything that community or tribe is doing that's causing appreciation within that community is causing it to go up in value, and so you start to really feel like you've got ownership in this thing. And you probably start to tell your friends about it. You might start adding your skills and start supporting that, whether it be as a developer, a designer. You might start giving that gift to that community, because what happens is you create an alignment of interest, and anyone that's done business understands the problems always lie when where the conflicts are. And if you can align the incentives of all the parties, something magical happens. And so this is the stuff that's driving this trend right now. So where is it happening? Is there adoption? There's 3 billion people on the planet that don't have access to financial services. Another 2 billion people with limited access to financial services. And so you're seeing this stuff happening in the developing world all over where the need is greatest. Does anyone know the biggest and most advanced payment market in the world? It's Kenya. And it's not using the shilling. They're using prepaid cell phone minutes, because this is where the need is the greatest. And so much in the same way that Africa leapfrogged wired telecommunications to go straight to wireless, it's in these places where you don't have the encumbered infrastructure. And it's a beautiful thing too, to democratize the global financial system in a way where every human being on the planet will have equal access, and the least fortunate billions are going to be the biggest beneficiaries, we benefit too. But, it's a beautiful thing to see. So that's what's happening on the consumer side, and for the obvious reasons, that's where the need's greatest. But this is the thing that's probably more interesting in this room. This is going back to 2014 and through 2015, and these are some of the big, call it the smartest financial companies in the world with big operations in California and New York, and they've all been jumping into this and making this a bigger and bigger part of the business over the last couple of years. And it hasn't slowed down. It's more or less every major financial institution has made this a critical part of their business, and this is in all the top cities in the world: London, Hong Kong, Singapore. You're seeing this in the hubs where the human capital is greatest and where the resources are greatest, because they know the future before we often do, because they've got more resources and access to information. But this is what's happening in the big cities around the world, and they're all aggressively, trying to compete for that business right now. And so this is the year 2018, where we leave the pilot phase. We've been building kind of all the bridges, the roads, the tunnels, connecting all the dots, getting all the pieces in place. And this is the year where scalability hits. This is when the big ideas become possible. And this is happening everywhere in the world. These are just the unicorns. I don't know if Puerto Rico has any, tech unicorns, but this is a global phenomenon. Technology is changing the world everywhere. This is just a chart of the blockchain portion of it. It's all over the world, and the reason these slides are so relevant is historically, if you had a great idea and you were not on the west coast of the United States, the probability of your idea ever coming to fruition was very low. You were at a massive disadvantage, and it's not because the west coast of the United States had all the smart people with the great ideas. It's that the capital was there. And so what's happening right now is venture capital is being disrupted in a way where capital is becoming accessible in ways it's never been before. Meaning if the next Mark Zuckerberg was to come out of Puerto Rico, that would be possible now. If the next Einstein can come out of Africa, all of these things are becoming possible now. And so it's a very exciting time, for innovation. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the numbers around venture capital. So in 2014, this industry took in capital that was comparable with the internet in 1995. In 2015, comparable with the internet in 96. Back then it cost you $5 million to build a website to sell shoes online. Now you can do things for tens of thousands of dollars, and accessing resources is changing. But what happened there in 2016 is, the VC said, where are the exits? Where is the revenue? And we already have a little exposure, we're not sure we get it. And so it went flat. And this is where the ICO emerged. The ICOs last year at the end exceeded seed stage venture capital by 4x. Meaning the blockchain mechanism that I just described to you is now 4 times bigger than earlier seed stage venture capital. This isn't like something I'm talking about 10 years from now. It happened last year. And this is just the beginning of that. You're seeing VC-backed deals. The VCs can't get the deals. That's the other problem with venture capital right now, is that the business model, and I've been a VC for a long time, is so dependent upon unicorns. The problem is the really good unicorns are going to go down this model. So it's something to be mindful of. I thought you might appreciate this just on kind of the sector 2017 ROI. Digital assets are interesting. If you're not following this, this should at least give you a reason to maybe learn a little more. I'm certainly not encouraging you to do anything, but learn. And so this is a graph of the ICOs over the last few years. And so I was one of the 5 founding board members of Mastercoin. That's before the chart begins. June of 2013 was the first ICO when the model was invented by J.R.R. Willett, another friend here in the room that was CTO of that project, and many of us in this industry. But for a long time, this model didn't take off because it wasn't understood how it works, and is it good? And you had lots of venture capital, and so the really talented entrepreneurs kept taking the VC money, until eventually Ethereum came along that could have raised money from any firm in the world. They were in such demand. And they said, no, we're going to do this ICO model. We're going to do this token model because it helps build community and it's necessary for our vision. We couldn't do it as